This is the Amp Hour Podcast, released October 18th, 2020. Episode 513. Audio DSP with Shannon Parks. Welcome to the Amp Hour. I'm Chris Gamble of Contextual Electronics.
And I'm Shannon Parks of Parks Audio.
Hey, Shannon, how are you?
Doing fantastic, Chris.
So we're going to be talking today about a little bit of audio stuff and your manufacturing business and your design. And like we were talking about a little bit before the show, like we've had some people on that have done audio, but like audio is your full-time thing. And there's like a specific crowd that, you know, pays for high end. In your case, it's affordable, but it's still, you know, high end, and it's very specific to, you know, people's tastes and what they want to do with that sort of thing. So what is the audio industry like these days in 2020? What is it like to sell an audio product to the, not the mass market, but, you know, the public?
Well, I mean, there's all different types of audio products now, and it's a bigger product base than ever. I mean, you have just some people wanting to convert audio off of their TV set to go into their stereo. You have people that want to have like a Sonos wireless setup so that everything's connected to their phone or whatever wireless streaming service that they're using. And then you have people that are using traditional stereo equipment, things that they've picked up from Goodwill or that they've got inherited from their folks. And that vintage market where people are listening to records and now even reel-to-reel tapes and cassette tapes, just people get a lot of fun out of that, a lot of entertainment.
Yeah, it's interesting. The reel-to-reel one too. I know there's like special sound about it, like all this, you know, all this very subjective stuff. But at the same time, I'm just like, man, I hate rewinding things. Like, I'm just amazed that people are like, oh yeah, no, that's the experience I want, is like to rewind stuff. And sometimes the tape breaks too. That's you know, that's great. I love my media getting destroyed.
I've never been a tape guy, and the ritual is part of it in all these different medias and formats.
Yep.
Just how you allot your time to do what you're going to do, and relax and listen to music, and definitely. The reel-to-reel is it's not my cup of tea, but I mean, I have a friend down the road that's really big into it, and I've heard his setup, and it's amazing, and it's a great experience.
Yeah,
but I'm a record guy.
Yeah, well, even records for me, I'm just like I don't like listening to whole albums, and yet some people are like, Chris, how do you not want to listen to the whole album? It's like the experience. I'm like, I got stuff to do, man. But like some people like just sit down and listen to the whole album as it was designed. And like there is like the whole like start to finish, you know, there was someone who put a lot of thought into what song goes into what song and how the whole thing feels. I'm just like, yeah, all right, great. I'm going to put in my Spotify playlist.
Well, that's the beauty of these older records that, I mean, you go back to a Beach Boys record in the early 60s, and those album sides may be 12 minutes long. There may be, you know, 6 2-minute songs. So just listening to one album side only takes 12 minutes. And I like that format better than, you know, getting back into the 90s and then the aughts when CDs were taking over. I mean, they put every bit of those 72 minutes, they put songs on there. Songs that probably maybe shouldn't have been on there.
Right. And then they had to sell it, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's like people want more. And then sitting down for 72 minutes, that's, I can't do that. I can't sit down for a movie. I don't like sitting down for an hour. But a record, that's a good format for me. I mean, it's like the length of a sitcom, 23 minutes or whatever that is.
Yeah,
that's about the length of one side of a record.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that's a great. And
point. I guess that's where our attention, at least my attention span is a Gen Xer.
Mm-hmm. So let's talk about records too. So records obviously have had this crazy resurgence. I saw that there was a tour. I think Adam Savage did a tour with Jack White in his pressing factory in Detroit, I think. And it's like, it is very interesting that it's like, as a format, it's coming back. Like, what is the status in 2020 of new records, old records? Like, I just actually rewatched High Fidelity, so of course now I'm thinking about, like, record collections too.
I love that movie. I mean, if
Oh,
if
yeah,
you
me
like
too.
records, you absolutely have to
Yeah.
love, High Fidelity.
Autobiographical.
I mean, the Smiths, and he's talking about the Smiths in there, he's talking about Zappa and things
Mhm.
that I love Zappa, I love the Smiths, so, I mean,
Mm.
all everything in that movie,
Yeah.
it's
It's
yeah,
all
it is
Chicago-based too, so I actually get like, I used to live pretty close to where the fake store was on Honore
oh,
in
cool.
Milwaukee, so, like, I used to go by there. It's like a, high-end that whole area is, like, very high-end now, but yeah,
Uh,
it's fun to spot that stuff.
but what the status is now, I mean, I don't, I mean, I know it's huge. And, I see those articles that somebody, like an aunt posts on Facebook saying that records are gonna outsell CDs this year and things like that. Of course, CDs, who's buying
Yep.
CDs?
That's right, right.
And, but, I think it's always, I think it's got at least another 10 years on it. That's
Mm.
that's always my horizon. Of course, I
Mhm.
would have said that 10 years ago.
Sure, sure.
But I remember, going to, record store day. The once a year, they have a big, release, in spring, in April usually, I think. It's been bumped back to I think it still hasn't happened yet because
And
of
who
because of
who's
COVID.
who's they? They is, like,
Well,
the
I don't
the
know
record
who's
store?
behind record store day other than, who started originally, but all these different, record shops are behind it, and, the record companies, and of course, there's a lot of
Mm.
small businesses uh, like the one you mentioned. What's his little business? It's up in Detroit, right?
Yeah, the
Uh,
Jack White label,
yeah,
yeah, it's like 3 something. It's got 3 in the
but
name. I forget what
but
it is,
but
but
they do all kinds of special record store day releases,
got
RSD,
it. Okay,
and it's a
okay.
big thing. But let's see,
It
what
kinda
was
sounds
I?
like a support your small business kinda like, I think American Express sponsors it, but it's like a yeah, okay, so it's like support local businesses and it's like a
Yeah,
specific day that everybody kinda
A
gets together
and they
to do
do
this thing.
all kinds of special, "Hey, here's something that was recorded live 18 years ago, it's never been out, and it's
Oh,
only gonna be out on 1,000 copies of vinyl."
I
And
see, okay.
when I was going to just, early on record store day, it was just a bunch of old guys like me, Gen Xers and
Yeah,
boomers,
yeah.
and then, like in 2014 record store day, I went, it was in Bloomington, Illinois, and which is a college town, and the line was around the block, and it was all millennials, and I was like, "Oh my gosh,
You're like, "What is
this is."
happening here?"
I was so thankful and so happy about it because
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah,
hey, this is what I do for a living
yeah.
make phono preamps for people that listen to records, and
Yes, we haven't said that yet, but we'll get there, yeah.
to see that there's gonna be another generation,
Yeah,
and I'm getting, I get emails from Zoomers all the time, too. So, that's when I knew it was getting big back just 6 years ago due to, the next generation taking over and being, I
yeah.
mean, actually, here the boomers and me, we were a bit lazy eating breakfast and showing up at opening time, whereas all the millennials had been in line for hours.
That's
So you
right,
get
yeah.
these, limited special releases.
Huh. Yeah, so what I'm getting out of all this is that it's it's, more experiential than it used to be. Well, not even than it used to be, but it's a harkening back to a more experiential time, and people are really longing for that in an age of digitalization and stuff like that. Of hey, I want to have a physical thing. One of my friends always talks about like tokenization, not tokenization, that's a different term, but like tokens, like taking the actual thing with you. Buying a record box, it has all the notes, it has everything with it. There's sometimes like I remember like Radiohead would have like special sets that they sell as a record, that kind of thing, and it's an experience instead of just listening to the song like I do on Spotify or similar.
Well, yeah, I mean, Spotify and all the streaming, that plays a part in all our lives, and we all use it, but it's not something tangible that we
Yeah.
own or have that religious experience of,
Yeah, yeah, that's
mellowing out with a
interesting.
glass of wine or a
Yeah,
pint of our
right.
favorite homebrew or whatever. They're 2 different. I mean, when I stream, I mean, I listen to a lot of YouTube when I'm doing work, when I'm laying out
Yeah.
a board or doing something, and that will make a lot of hi-fi guys wince, but it's like that's kind of acting like the AM radio of
Yeah,
the
or
old
Muzak.
days. Well, not music, but, I mean, an AM radio, you just got this scratchy little thing that you bring wherever you are to fill a need.
Yeah,
But then to have something where you are sitting down and relaxing and listening to music, and the music is part of the experience, like if we're watching Netflix or whatever, to
mhm,
relax, then having it in a real media that you can hold is important, and CD has, it's that's not the media.
yeah,
People don't say, "Hey, here's a CD I really wanna share with you."
yeah. Listen to
It
the depth of these bits, yeah.
but but,
96 kilohertz, ooh, yeah.
I mean, the beauty of vinyl is you buy the record, and then you get the record, but you also get this piece of paper that's inside the record that says,
Mhm, yeah,
"Here's here's the digital copies too."
yeah.
So,
Oh, that's nice.
when a Zoomer buys a record now, they're
When
buying
you're saying Zoomer, is that a combining of Gen X and Boomer?
no, that's the after the millennials. You guys are gonna hit 40 this year, so
Yeah, that's true.
so,
Yeah, 1980 it starts.
my daughter's a Zoomer,
Okay.
and the Zoomers are on my, and
Zoomer, so
she's
that's like Gen Z,
yeah,
man,
Gen Z.
all these names, you know?
I think Zoomer has to be the
Zoomer's great.
w w
I think it's great actually because
I think
it allows you to be disparaging, but also, respectful.
well, it's what it's what their experience is. I mean,
Yeah.
it's Gen Z, that kinda means nothing, but are
Right,
they
right.
living through Zoom right now because they have to? And
Oh, like that.
are they all gonna
Got it.
remember Zoom? Yeah.
Yeah, 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 yeah. Okay,
Uh
that makes a lot more sense. Oh,
Oh, yeah,
interesting.
they're the Zoom generation. I can't
Oh,
my daughter's in 4th grade,
uh-huh.
so she can kinda use a computer fairly
Yeah,
well,
but she
but,
has to for
there's
interacting and yeah,
kindergartners that are, the Zoomers that are having
that's
to
crazy.
use all this. I can't imagine what their experience is, but, hey,
Yeah,
they're
yeah.
resilient, and
Yeah.
that's who they're gonna be.
Yeah, yeah, no, that's great. All right, so let's talk a little bit. Okay, so we've set the stage now for the fact that it is very experiential. There is a lot of, interesting stuff here. Like you mentioned, what we're talking about here is the Puffin. It is a phono preamp. The first thing that I think is you have a lot of potentially grumpy customers. True or false?
I mean, I think anybody that's selling something is trying to provide a solution to somebody's problem, right? I mean,
Yeah, yeah.
that's kind of, business 101 is somebody has a problem and you need to fix it.
Hmm.
And, definitely so I don't know if you meant just curmudgeon-y customers
Yeah, I guess
or just
touchy. I guess I would expect so. Like I've read the Amazon reviews, and first off, people love this thing. There are some really great reviews on Amazon, and we're going to talk about Amazon a little bit as well. But I guess you're selling to the public, right? You're selling to actual people that have this, this very specific experience. They love their sound. They want it to sound good. You're dealing with a lot of different setups, and I would imagine that it's I guess touchy is probably the better. I don't know if I said grumpy, probably touchy, but like, what is it like to deal with people because it is a subjective experience, but also revered. Like so you're making something for public consumption that potentially could go very wrong, and then how do you make something that goes very well, like it does?
well, I mean, y you gotta just y y I've been emailing with these people. When I say these people, I mean people like me, so I don't mean
Hmm.
that,
Sure.
but audio people. I mean, I've been conversing, and I've been an audio person my whole life too. So, I mean, I've had a lot of these same experiences. So if I was not part of that community, I
Hmm.
certainly couldn't do this.
Got it.
I wouldn't have the sympathy putting in the time to help solve
Mm,
some of these problems to get where they're wanting to go.
yeah.
But I think, and here's an interesting point, especially for engineers. I'm sure a lot of engineers think that a lot of these audio guys are crazy with some of the things, some of the terms they use, and some of these snake oil devices. But I found that most of these things that they're saying, the words may not be the correct, or their solutions may not be correct, but they're talking about real problems that they have
Mm,
with how it sounds. I mean, these are systems problems, right? I mean, speakers and rooms and the media
yeah.
and
Could you give us an example of like a phrase they might say that at outset sounds weird or wrong, but actually is describing a real problem?
I, I well, here's a couple. You know, one I use this term. It sounds thin. The
Mm,
music
okay,
sounds
that's a great
thin,
example. Yeah, yeah.
and a thin sound is just. And I've noticed this with certain types of cartridges. I mean, all these different cartridges, which are part of the turntable and actually are the transducer there vibrating on the
The
record. They
Okay,
all have their
the
own.
cartridge is the thing that for people that don't some people may have not actually experienced, phono players in the past, but, like,
Sure.
cartridge is the thing that actually the needle that touches the LP, right, or the record.
Right.
Yeah,
And every, manufacturer kinda has their own characteristic sound. I mean, these aren't just, flat frequency responses.
yeah.
The their data sheets may show a flat frequency response, but there's definitely a tone
Right.
that comes out, and who knows what type of load, and that may just be into some
Mhm,
100 kilohertz resistive 100, kilo ohm resistive load or something,
mhm,
and not the cable with the capacitance, and then what the input to the phono preamp looks, because capacitance really wreaks havoc on uh,
mm,
these cartridges, and actually is used as a tool to make them sound correct, or was in the past.
mhm,
And so a customer's maybe sound, hey, everything sounds thin. It doesn't. I want more warmth. Now
mhm.
that's a real term that I'm
Yeah,
sure a
yeah, yeah.
lot of engineers are like, oh, warmth. Tubes sound warm. Now
Yep,
that's a
yep.
real. I'm sure Dave Jones is.
Uh-huh. He's
Warmth
squirming
is
even though he's not here.
oh,
He heard you say it somehow.
but my gosh, warmth is one of the key parts of good sound, and that's
And
I think
what would you classify warmth as? Like from so you now you're like you're the encyclopedia or not the you're the dictionary between audio customer and engineer. What is warmth?
I mean, I think it's just simply a balance of the lower frequencies versus the higher frequencies. And
Okay, great.
these are problems that sound engineers that are doing final mastering of records or albums. This is the stuff that they deal with every time that they're doing their production with Pro Tools. They're trying to
Okay.
balance how things are in the low frequencies versus the highs, and just
Hmm.
to make it sound all weighted properly.
Got it.
And a warmth, think about how they maybe produced some of these records back in the '70s. They wanted to dial back some of the bass frequencies so that they
Yeah.
could get those grooves closer together. This
Yeah.
is all
Compress the hell out of
mechanical.
it.
Well, when you get these grooves closer together, then you
Hmm.
can put more minutes on a record.
Yeah.
And not only can you get more minutes on a record, you have a record that plays better on more turntables because you want it to play
Oh,
on everybody's record player, right? Even
interesting.
something from Montgomery Ward,
Yeah.
if people can remember
Yeah.
companies like Montgomery Ward.
Yep. So one thing that I would do a callback to as well is so Ben Krasnow's been on the show before, but he has that amazing animation of a needle
That
in the
is
groove of an LP,
that should be in
and
the
like
Smithsonian.
I love it, right?
I've seen that reposted so many times, and I look at it every single time it gets reposted online, and, uh, and that's the only one I really know of that anybody's done something like that. Yeah,
Hmm.
Ben, he deserves an award for that.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. The Giphies or something like
Oh.
that. But the thing I like about that, and the thing that I always talk about is when I think about like RF and translating stuff and thinking about the term bandwidth, right? I think about like, oh, like looking at a spectrum analyzer and seeing like how wide the band is. I feel like that's a very visual representation of that term. But then also for something about that image specifically as well. It's like seeing the needle in the groove and being like, oh, it's going up and down and left and right. Like an audio signal again. And so it's also the bandwidth there, right? It's like a visual bandwidth kind of thing. And what you're saying is sometimes that bandwidth is less to be able to make those grooves closer together. Is that a safe assumption?
Yeah, I mean, the whole idea of lower frequencies, being more difficult to physically get impressed on that PVC platter there. I mean, that goes back to the whole reason why I have a business in the first place doing making these puffins, making these phono preamps, because they have this EQ that where they lower the bass frequencies, reference to 1 kilohertz, the bass frequencies are down 20 dB.
Wow. Wow.
And then the upper frequencies going up to 20 kilohertz, those are boosted at 20 dB. So you got this slope, and you can imagine it hinged from 1 kilohertz. And then what these preamps do, like my Puffin, then we just reverse that. We go ahead and boost the bass frequencies 40 dB,
Wow.
and just well, we switch everything back, so it's flat. But if we didn't have that, records would be well, you'd have to go back and look at what they had with 78s because some of these 78s were flat, pressed
Hmm.
flat. And also with these EQs, it gives it better noise floor because then you're doing this de-emphasis and pre-emphasis roll off. And they
Okay.
were actually going to do that with CDs too, when DACs were 14 bits in the early 80s. And I
Oh,
think
interesting.
they should have done it. I think that it would have been a better product if they had before they got better DACs down the road.
Well, okay, so let's take a quick step back here. So when you say the compressed stuff below 1 kilohertz, does that mean that the so now uh, Shannon, named perhaps after Mr. Information Theory, Shannon, is that information gone? So like, is it compressed below 1 kilohertz, or is it a cut below one
Well,
kilohertz?
I and I kinda hate using the word compressed because that makes us think of digital compression. I mean, we're talking about, yeah, physical, shrinkage just because it's a
Yeah.
20 dB quieter signal.
Hmm.
So a 20 dB, 20 dB quieter, bass signal on
Yeah.
a record, it's just gonna be a much smaller, you're not gonna need, physically whatever that would be, 3 millimeters per groove or something
Mm.
like that.
Okay.
Because then you might only be able to do 3 minutes of music or something. And that's why, indeed, the 78s going back pre LPs, yeah, they were very short. They were only like 70, just a few minutes because
Yeah.
they didn't have that equalization.
Okay, so it's basically like a low roll off then, but this is all because of the physical compression, the physical space constraint.
Right.
Is it that so like a 100 hertz signal that might have been otherwise? Is it like that would have been like a huge component? Again, I'm thinking of the animated GIF of the needle on the record. Would that have been a large component of that track width? Is that the idea, or the groove rather, the groove size?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, at 100 hertz, that would have been maybe down minus 10 dB or something. They would have dropped that down.
Okay.
So 3.16 times smaller. So you
Mm,
gain that your groove there is 3.16 times smaller. So just for
okay.
100 hertz.
Huh. Okay. Yeah, that's the kind of like so it's all the physical constraint, and then that plays into the actual compression, or sorry, the filtering rather, and the mastering that happens that to
Right.
make it fit on a record. Okay, so that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean that brought about great I mean that was the whole high fidelity thing in the late 50s and why LPs just blew away 78s and how they took over because they were able to just long player is what LP stands for,
Hmm.
right? So they
That's
were
right.
able to
Yep.
get more music on there and also at better fidelity.
And can you walk us through the different record types real quick? So 78s are the large format, right? That's like is it a larger
Well,
size as well?
78s are what are they 10 inches
Okay.
primarily and the 78s I mean that is really kind of a catch-all term going back to any disc, what, back
Mm.
to the 1880s?
Okay. Yeah. Like after they went from the when they were actually flat pressed instead of those coils or whatever the
Well, I mean,
Edison style thing.
Edison competed, with, what, Berliner? He was going for the discs, and, Edison, he liked those
They're
cylinders.
canisters, right? Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
like what yeah, they yeah.
But, yeah, so there's about 70 years of 78s, and they may not all be actually 78, and they
Okay.
had different equalizations. I mean, the amount of equalizations that different countries used and different manufacturers used, it was a format war really, right?
Yeah,
And
yeah,
there
right.
was I mean, there's hundreds of those, and that was another reason why I thought DSP would be cool because I could then do any of those. and
Mhm.
then,
Yeah.
hopefully get some of these folks that are really into some of these old records. And if you get people that are huge collectors of 78s, then you get a little bit of bona fides with
Mhm. That's
with
right.
people that are into regular records,
Yeah. Okay.
newer stuff.
I think we have sufficiently set the stage that there is a lot of formats, there's a lot of emotion, and there's a lot of interest in getting these records to sound good of all these things. So let's talk about the actual hardware now. So the Puffin is your main product, the only product, and we'll talk about that I think too. But what is it and what's inside of it?
Well, it's just a little box, what, 4 inches by 3 by 6, and, what's in it? I have a Cortex M4. That's the main brains of it. It has a that controls the interface screen. I got a little encoder and a menu, and, it has a ADC for the analog coming in from the record that gets processed and then gets sent back out through the DAC. And there is an adjustable gain stage before the ADC, just so you get in a sweet spot for your ADC. But
Mhm.
it's standard standard components that you get from Mauser that people have used, and you can get eval boards for any of those things, even on eBay, TI parts. But the DSP, the Cortex M4 is without it, and without that single float, my the FPU on those M4s are just it's just wonderful. It makes life a lot easier than
Mhm.
dealing
Mhm.
uh, with fixed numbers, I tell you.
Okay. I'm trying to find the comment that I saw on there. Oh, where is it? Shoot, I can't find it now. But it was like, why would I want to put an ADC or sorry, a DSP in front of all of my other stuff? It was basically that. And basically they're saying, hey, we understand that this has, digital signal processing internally on it, and that's like poison for my high-end audio setup.
Yeah, I mean, well, I mean, he could restate that question. Why would I want my my system to be turned into MP3 music? You know, that's kind of the question he has, and that's a good question. I mean, because digital is a I mean, it's a format, it's a conversion, there's all different type there's it's the processing, they're just and the quality can be all over the place depending on what you're trying to do. And that's exactly the same way for analog. I mean, it's what are you trying to do? What quality? The beautiful thing is, now it's easy for us to do 24 bits, 96 kilohertz. We can easily do that and get good quality sampling, and aliasing is not an issue.
Yeah. Yeah, I feel like a lot of the disparaging remarks around DSP and digitalization and things like that, it's like when people are saying that, they're saying like, oh, it's bad digitalization or bad processing, codec artifacting, the types of stuff that happens. But like,
Sure.
if people actually looked at the actual output of things, they're like, they're yes, they're not raw, they're not lossless, they're not other things, but they are, assuming you have everything done right, which I'm going to assume here, like everything, it's almost perfect replication of the actual analog sound. And I try and like talk to people about that, but it's tough.
It depends on who's doing it because, I mean, every day, if you listen to YouTube, you can hear some crappy compressed audio on YouTube, and you can also turn on your TV set and see some little compression, artifact,
Hmm.
it depending on what you're streaming from Netflix.
Yeah.
So
Right.
we see digital artifacts and hear digital artifacts all the time in our lives. So we know
Yeah.
they exist. And, so some of these devices, they have to prove it to us that they aren't, gonna do that to us because, yeah, if I listen to a record, am I gonna put up with what I put up with from YouTube and Netflix with some of these compression digital artifacts? No, I certainly don't want that. So, yeah, you have to make a product that doesn't do that.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah, right. So then you said you had made this choice obviously to make it to DSP front end and things like that. So what does that process look like? So you're basically you describe kind of the signal chain here. You bring it in, you clean it up a little bit with some filtering and some amplification, preamping rather. You do an ADC conversion, and then what's happening internally in this Cortex M4?
Well, I mean, let me get back to the analog real quick before I
Okay,
answer
sure.
that. I mean, because still, gain and low noise is still that's the bread and butter of everything. If you can't
Hmm.
have, gain with low noise, then your product's gonna suck in audio, and that's
Hmm.
that's that's one of the biggest problems people have. So, yeah, getting in, and that's all analog. That's just a BJT type op amp, very low
Hmm.
noise.
Yep.
So
Yep.
you get this good quality stuff in, and then then once you got it in a DSP, I mean, you can have so much fun. And this
Hmm.
is this is where I'm excited because I'd love to do this, for the next 20 years, just manipulating it with the DSP. And
Mm.
and the key is, uh, once you get it into your digital realm, then you can do any number of preamps or filtering or whatever you want to do with that, and just have a blast. I mean,
Mm.
so and you can do it without adding massive amounts of noise by having all these discrete op amp, uh, filtering with
Right.
pots. I
Right.
mean, there's always these pots involved in
Yeah.
traditional preamps that get noisy and scratchy, and usually they're high impedance, so they're just noise magnets. So being able to do that in DSP is just fun. But
No, that's a good. I like that as a comparison as well, though, too, because assuming it wasn't all, like someone's like a purist, quote unquote, and they're like, no, I want an all analog front end. But yeah, you have five stages. Each stage is amplifying the next. Any noise gets carried all the way through. So,
so I mean, a lot of audio purists have tried to do minimal systems and not use even preamps with tone controls.
mm.
Defeatable tone controls have been important to a lot of hi-fi folks over the last, 20, well, for a long time
you,
because
you said defeatable?
defeatable as in you could switch it so it would like
Ah, okay.
bypass it altogether.
Got it. So, like for comparison, so you could be like, like an eye doctor of like version A, version B, version A, version B, like that.
Well, I mean, I think that's what they maybe were intentional, the original, how they were engineered so that people could do that. But I mean, I think that's been especially with this vintage gear, if people can defeat and bypass some of this tone control, especially on something that's maybe 50 years old now, that's getting a little bit noisy
Hmm.
and very, all these aging components. Then people like to do that. Especially these
Got it.
pots. These old pots are just,
Yeah, I mean, there's dust in there, and they start to get shorted out, and yeah, it's. I mean, they have wear because of the physical mechanisms that's happening, like they're carbon resistors, effectively, right? With like a turn.
exactly.
Yeah, it's.
So, what do I do in the DSP? Well, the first thing I thought of, other than being able to do these different EQs for different records, I was like, hey, I want to be able to just do a simple warmth control because
Mm,
that's something that it's intuitive for everybody. Does this sound more detail and thin, or is it warm? And,
mm,
and once again, the warmth is just the balance of more weighted lower frequencies and a little
hmm.
attenuation on the higher frequencies, just so it balances just right to your ear. There's not a right or wrong.
Yeah.
And of course, the rooms and the speakers, all that influences that warmth. So I
Mm.
just wanted to have a knob that I could turn and say, "Hey, turn it to where it sounds just right to you."
Turn up the good, turn down the bad. Come on.
Yeah, yeah, I think it's intuitive. I mean,
Yeah,
these graphic equalizers, I think, are completely unintuitive.
yeah. Oh, I remember. My parents used to have like a console record, or like a audio player thing, and it would have like 18 band EQ, and I used to just like mess with everything. It had the actual sliders on each one, and oh man, little Chris really messed with their sound.
Oh, those things are. I mean, if somebody's good at controlling those, they could probably become a famous audio engineer. But that changes from even record to record. Unfortunately,
Oh yeah, right.
one record may be warm sounding, and then the next one could be thin.
Hmm.
And and that's true, like, right now, a lot of the new pressings have been remastered to be more warm.
Mhm.
It's obvious, it's very obvious, and then the '70s pressings are thinning more thin sounding just because, A, they were trying to make it so it would play on more gear and that they
Mhm.
could put more minutes, on that side. So just
And
having
what
a simple knob. I like the idea of having a knob that
Yeah.
a pleasure knob that you turn it in the direction to make it sound better. Very simple
Yeah.
and intuitive.
Yeah, that's great actually. What would happen so give us a little, like, I guess it's just gonna be an explanation here, but, like, if you had a remastered album from 2020 that then you put on a system that had EQ kind of set for a 1970s thin sounding record, what would that sound like? So, like, newly remastered, but adjusted for a '70s record, what does that sound like in these days?
Well, I mean, if you had something set up to warm up a thin record and then you
Mhm.
put on a warm record, then you would have a very dull sounding, overly warm record, and that happens. I mean,
Yeah.
that's it's nice that you can switch back and forth
Sure.
easily because yeah, you do go from playing modern pressings to 50-year-old pressings.
Sure, sure. And so what does that sound like? Is it, like, really heavy midtones, though, or high tones? Or, like, where is when it's, like, warm on a warm, what is that actually what's being saturated in that case?
It's just yeah, the mids and the lows are just, you have less detail popping out, and it just sounds, you know, just the overly warm. I just it's funny that I can't think of a better term.
Yeah. No, it's tough, it's tough. And it's like we said, it's subjective. There's, these words that are used for it, but at the end of the day, some people, I can imagine, like, people that don't even listen to that much music, they wouldn't hear this. They wouldn't understand the difference between the 2. They'd be like, "Yeah, they both sound like music. What's the problem?" So there's also that. It's just like the human ear and how we are able to, describe it in words
Yeah,
is
I
really
don't think so.
difficult.
I think it is. I think it's very clear. I
Oh,
think
really?
that
Okay.
you could demo this to anybody.
Here's the thing. Young Chris used to listen to, stuff downloaded off of DC++ and, LimeWire and, 64 kilohertz or less
Sure.
and, like super compressed. And I was fine with it because I was listening through early 2000 cell phone too. Like, so there are many different levels of how crappy people will listen to music and not care. Just saying.
Well, I mean, and I do that too. I mean, man, some of those Napster songs, my gosh, we're even going
They're
back
so
before.
compressed. Yeah.
Oh my goodness. But once again, when you have a knob and you can say, "Hey, is this?" It's kind of like when you go to the optometrist. You know,
Yeah. Yeah.
one or two. Good or
Yep. Yep. Yep.
which one is better. When you do that, that is, you don't even know, what's he doing. You just
Hmm.
know that one's a little
Right.
more
Right.
clear, and
Right.
that's the beauty of just having a knob or a switch versus having to really configure something and
Yeah.
say A or B, and it's like, well, no, I hear more highs. I hear,
Yeah.
I hear the hi hat a little bit better. That was kind of completely missing before,
Yeah.
and the room doesn't sound as boomy, too much bass in the room. You get all this content from 200
Yeah.
hertz to 400 hertz that starts just really making a boomy bass sound instead of a tight bass, and that's once again that's the studio engineers are fighting that and dealing with that every day, and,
Sure.
and things
Yeah.
that we need to deal with our music when we care.
Sure. I think another analogy that I've been thinking about as you're saying this stuff too is it's like I look at a photo that I take of my dog and I then go into the editing settings. And these days it's not like, Chris, would you like to pull up, the greens or the blues or the whites, the blacks, whatever. I guess whites and blacks are kind of like included these days. But like a lot of the settings and pre-filters that are happening on like Instagram type of thing, it's not, you know, Chris, do you want to adjust all the color curves and the saturation stuff? It's just like slide left or right. What looks better to you? And then I do that.
Exactly.
So it's kind of like that. It feels like.
Yeah, I mean, and let's put this more into something that people see all the time. I think about the 4:3 TV format and all the
Hmm.
video that's 4:3, and of course, nobody has, well, most of us don't have 4:3 TVs anymore. And
No,
looking at
yeah,
that format and how, the cable provider, satellite, Netflix, how they decide to show us, that old content can be that can be a real mixed bag.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
and most of the time, we don't even have a choice in how they do it. I mean, when they, like, just do a zoom in and half the
Yeah,
face
just
is
clip off the
missing,
top, yeah.
and
Yep.
it's really blurry, and it's like, "Oh my gosh." And if we just had back with the DVDs, we would be able to switch the aspect ratio and all that. But being able to do that, it's fixing those types of problems is what I want to do with audio, so
Yep.
so that you
Yep.
can get the aspect ratio and the saturation and all that easily and quickly, the way that you find pleasing and not obnoxious.
Yeah. Okay. So let's go back to the front end of this thing again. So you mentioned there's some, preamplification and stuff on the front end. What about like the power supplies? How, I mean, that could ruin anyone's day in a signal integrity kind of standpoint. What does it have to look like for this device?
Yeah, I like simple power supplies, and I don't like batteries. So I just use a simple 12-volt off the shelf switch mode power supply.
Oh, really?
And of course, their frequency content is up there. I mean, I think 30 to 50 kilohertz. So
Okay.
filtering's pretty easy,
Got
and
it.
their leakage currents are small. And the idea of making something that plugged into AC mains, that would just terrify me too.
Hmm.
So yeah, I just filtering is no big deal. I just the way I design things is to have very low noise references, and I worry less about regulation. So
Okay.
that the noise floor comes from the references as opposed to whatever's coming in from the power supply.
So the power. So what does the actual back of the box look like? What is a user plugging in?
Back of the box,
It's like an it's like the off the shelf like a
I don't have a back of the box. It's
oh, sorry, top of the
because it's
box.
it's the top it's all
Yeah,
top
sorry.
plate construction,
Yeah, yeah.
but yeah, no, not wall warts. I use the mini desktop supplies. I like the mini desktop. That way, they have the detachable C8 connectors.
Ah, okay.
Or C7 connectors. I forget which is, the one of them C7, one of them C8, but yeah, that way it can easily ship overseas to different
Mhm.
countries by swapping in a different cord, and the wall warts, you're more limited in options
Mhm.
with the goofy connectors, so that's what I like to do.
Got it. Okay. So basically it's a DC jack that goes to a brick. The
Yep,
brick has the switch mode
right.
and then the input to it's like it's not it's the whatever you were saying the C whatever the 8 was
C8,
or C8, yeah. Yeah, and that's like then you can plug into an IEC or whatever your localized thing is. Okay. So then it's an auto transformer on the front side.
yeah, they're universal supplies, so they work anywhere.
Mhm.
So,
Yeah, that's cool. That's cool.
because yeah, you gotta be able to ship this anywhere. I mean, that's
Yeah, 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 of
key.
course. Yeah. And so, okay, so noise, you're able to. That's an interesting idea too. That you just take it up above the audio range, and low pass filter everything on the power, and you're good to go.
Yeah, linear supplies, may be great for power amps. It's pretty simple to just throw some huge, capacitors and set up your for like a power amp, a class B power amp, but for you still get some residual, uh, low frequency noise, your 120 hertz. But that's, in a balanced setup, you can get rid of that, but I'm doing everything single-ended,
Hmm.
so, I definitely wanna stay away from linear supplies. I don't wanna get
Yeah.
when you start amplifying. I mean, I can do 72 dB a gain.
Hmm.
So, when you're doing 72 dB a gain and you have rectified noise in the audio range, you you're gonna hear it. So,
Yeah,
you
that's right.
gotta 'cause that's yeah, that's tough to do.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. Okay. So now, what does the so now we've got the power, we've got the amplification, but what does the actual signal look like coming in, and like what about the impedance off the cartridge? So like, seems like you have to kind of deal with that incoming impedance.
There's a fantastic, web page by Jim Hagerman, who also makes phono preamps, and you can just, type into Google "cartridge loading" or Hagerman cartridge loading, but if you type in "cartridge loading," it'll take you there. And he has got a wonderful document, and with little calculators even, on what that signal looks like and how that cartridge behaves with these different loads.
Mm.
And this is, in actuality, I read that page 8 years ago, and I was like, "Wow, all these different, changing this." 47K is kind of the standard load for phono preamps, and then you
Uh-huh.
have maybe some different capacitive loading, some from your interconnect from your turntable, and then others from switches that you do on your phono preamp. But with a moving magnet cart, which is the most standard turntable cartridge, it really has a huge effect in this 10 kilohertz to 15 kilohertz range, because you have the inductance of the cartridge in parallel with the capacitance of the cable, and the capacitance at the phono preamp, and the loading resistance at the preamp. So you add all this together, and you do not get a nice flat line out to 20 kilohertz and beyond. You've
Mhm.
you've got a nice little tank circuit, nice little peak resonance right there, maybe at 11 kilohertz, which is obviously within,
That's hearing range.
yeah. So the whole, I know, once again, a lot of engineers may be like, How can you hear all these differences?" Well, with cartridges and records, it is night and day. You will hear huge differences just due to this loading, because you're having things happen at 10, 11, 12 kilohertz.
Mhm.
And going on his website, really, I mean, it'll show you it'll even, emulate the resonance and everything. It's really cool.
Yeah.
And, so being able to adjust that to where you like it, where it sounds good to you, where it's not peaking too much and sounding too bright, where it's not overly loaded, so it's damped where it's rolling off too much and not peaking enough at the highs. It's all, personal taste.
Mm.
So once again, a lot easier with DSP to adjust that.
Okay, so you do that so you basically then back calculate what that cartridge might look like in the frequency
Yep,
domain, and then you adjust for it, you're saying?
right. And it really all to adjust that resonance really only happens with high inductance, moving magnet cartridges. Classic cartridges like Shure, and then, Ortophone, they have a lot of, inductance, so that they really do have kind of a critical peak there. And, the Japanese cartridges and other cartridges may have less inductance, where they don't have that peak down closer to 10 kilohertz, so they're
Mm.
flatter, but you don't have as much control over the sound. So, yeah, in a DSP, I'm kind of emulating this, how you can change, this like a Shure or a phone cartridge, but you can do that on any type of cartridge, or even just a CD, player that you hook up.
Mhm.
I think that adds a lot of, it can add a lot of vitality and sound nice.
Yeah, okay. So let's dive into the DSP side of things. So how do you actually work in that realm? I mean, are you writing basically, code in C and then just kind of working through like how do you prototype all this DSP stuff as well? Because you mentioned the FPU in the Cortex M4. That sounds great. But like are you writing individual modules and testing things out or how do you set this up?
I did like my original filter work in MATLAB, and nowadays, I would recommend folks to get, to do that all in Python, because the tools in Python now with NumPy and what is it, SciPy or Skippy, all these
Mm,
different
I'm not a
filtering
yeah, I'm not
tools.
a Python person. So
You're Are you kidding me, Chris? You don't use Python?
I've used it a little bit, but it's just yeah.
How do you use KiCad and not use Python?
Well, what I do is I go and I find other people's scripts, then I implement those. And by implement, I mean use them, and I'm very very grateful for them.
I I hand edit. I just use Notepad++ to hand
Mm,
edit
nice.
my KiCad files, but,
Mm,
well, I'm
a
shocked, Chris,
purist.
that you don't use Python. Uh, yeah, definitely, you need some of these filtering tools either in MATLAB or, in Python,
Hmm.
to design some of these filters and decide what you wanna do. And
Mm,
then you're just getting these, standard, these standard digital filters, and then, geez, yeah, I write it all in C. Yeah, I write it all in C, and later on, I changed it all to assembly just because I needed every single cycle.
Nice. Okay, and I wanna hear about that too, but, like, the I guess the so do you have, like, a test file that you put into Python or MATLAB, and then you, like, look at the frequency roll-off that gets generated from that? Like, what does that process look like?
Uh, I just use the general, what in MATLAB, FV tool parentheses B comma A. I mean, you're just so the I use FV tool primarily in MATLAB, where you're just and you point it to your coefficients that
Is
you've
that
that you've
frequency, visualization tool or something? I don't know
yeah,
that one.
yeah, yeah. It
I don't know
just
any of these actually.
yeah, yeah. FV tool is really easy to use in that you don't have to set up anything. You don't like with Python. You have to start doing using matplotlib and to do graphing and things, and it gets a bit complex. But yeah, and then there's also a filter designer tool with uh, MATLAB, and there's I don't use that as much as just looking at FV tool.
Okay.
Yeah, it just shows it from DC to Nyquist is all it does because you have to punch in what your sampling rate and all that is. So
Mhm.
that's what it shows you.
Okay. Okay. Cool. And so when you're doing so then you're translating from Python or MATLAB to C then. And so what does that algorithm development look like then? So and again, like I'm trying to kind of visualize like I haven't seen the menu structure, all this stuff. I assume there's different menus you can adjust different things, but like you're creating these filters and then you're implementing them, I assume as functions internally in C or later in assembly. So like what does that process look like?
I mean, originally, and still, I don't know, maybe half of it still is just pre-calculated coefficients and put in a table, and there that then that the C program then references those coefficients and plugs them in. And so it's not there might be so like I have a tilt function, which is has 13 different settings. And that'll just point to 13 different sets of coefficients that I pre-calculated that are in
Hmm.
memory. And then, and then later on, I did make it where my EQ was even more flexible for the different 78 types, where people wanted to be able to do hundreds of different combinations. And I couldn't I couldn't even figure out exactly what they wanted to do.
Right. Like, you just do it yourselves.
Yeah, so I would use Python and MATLAB then to actually create those functions, writing in those languages, and then after I got it doing what I wanted it to do, then I would port that over. I mean, I would actually normally do it in both MATLAB and then
Hmm.
Python, and then rewrite it again in C. I tell you, getting the whole going from pound sign to percentage sign to all the different commenting and different,
Oh, yeah, yeah. Your brain's all messed up trying to figure out which one's which, yeah.
that oh, wow, trying to communicate, with
Yeah.
somebody after doing that all day. Hey, but we don't have to communicate with anybody anymore since we're all sitting behind our computers.
That's right, yeah, right. Yeah, no typing necessary when we're all remote, right?
Yeah, but I'm not a I mean, this is the first time I ever did it, so I was just learning and learning those tools, and, it was a lot of fun.
Yeah.
And then, yeah, writing it in C, you do wanna write for speed, so getting out your logic analyzer and timing your cycles and
Mm.
all that, that's a big part of it.
Okay, and so is that's part of taking it into assembly as well? Is that, like, part of the motivation was basically the signal chain internally, like, all the blocks of DSP that you're implementing could cause enough delay that it's problematic, or what's the reasoning there?
Yeah, I mean, latency is always something you worry about with audio DSP, but, I mean, in my case, it was more less of a latency issue than just running out of, running out of resources. I mean, I have to do everything with 64 kbytes.
Mm.
So, I mean, I have as much memory as a Commodore 64 that I'm dealing with, and that's and if you have, when you're doing digital audio on a notebook, I mean, you have gigs, and you have a lot of memory
Right.
for storage and to do manipulation.
Right, you're not running MATLAB on 64K,
Oh my
huh?
gosh.
Or Python, to be honest, like, yeah.
Yeah, well, yeah, yeah. Python can chunk away. Both will chunk away.
Mhm.
But, yeah, to get your cycles down, just so that you don't, just so you have plenty of time for housekeeping and so you're not spending 100% of your time doing, DSP, have
Mhm.
to make sure you interact with, the menu and,
Sure. Yeah, you don't want your menu to take 3 seconds to respond or anything like that.
right, exactly.
So are you doing, like, do you do a real-time operating system to deal with that and, like, have priority, or you just do interrupt-based type things?
No, I just, it's just interrupt based.
Mhm.
And the ADC and the DAC, all that's what an I2S setup.
Mhm.
That's all DMA based.
Okay.
So that once again, to have it be DMA and have the FPU on the Cortex M4, just things that you just couldn't do on earlier microcontrollers. I mean, the fact that you
Mhm.
can do this on a microcontroller at all is amazing.
Mhm.
And what you can do is a lot of fun.
Yeah, I mean, so some of this probably leads back to, like, the consumer level thing, right? So this is a product that currently is $489 dollars on Amazon. So, not cheap, but also, not a ton of headroom in terms of a small batch assembly type of thing.
Right.
So I assume that the micro is kind of part of that, but I was gonna ask, like, why not upgrade the micro and get more than 64K?
Well, I plan to do that down the road.
Got it.
I mean,
Okay. So time investment and
the
time cost.
yeah, well, it's, the Cortex M7 is what I'm gonna use
It's
next.
singing your name.
Oh, the Cortex M7, that, looking at, the Teensy 4.1, my
Oh, yeah.
gosh.
Yeah.
And, does Adafruit have a M7 board out yet?
I'm sure they
I
do.
yeah,
Yeah. They're pretty on top of things.
these Cortex M7s, the amount of, I mean, what, 400, I mean, they're up around 500 megahertz.
Mhm.
They have tons of RAM,
Yeah.
and they have double precision, which is something I wanna do. I'm curious how what their cycles will be like on that double precision, because you still gain a lot by doing things fast, but, they say they
And
support it, so I imagine that, are they doing these calculations in single cycles? I don't know.
right. I mean, when you do your processing on this stuff too, is it so are you what is your unit? I mean, you're not using doubles, are you? I mean, like, in the actual code? So is it all fixed point math?
No, 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 no,
Oh,
it's all it's I'm doing everything in the single floats.
okay. So it's all floats, but it's yeah, okay. So because that targets the FPU is what you're saying.
Yeah, because, the M4 has all these, special DSP instructions that are single cycle. So,
Okay.
when you're doing these single cycle, floating point multiplies, I mean,
Mhm.
what you can get done is a lot. And
Yeah.
actually, back when I rewrote things a year ago, when I went and started to do things in assembly to get more cycles, I did do some, some of the things I switched over to fixed point. And actually, my education on that was Eli Hughes, your
Oh, yeah.
guest from a couple weeks ago.
Cool, cool.
Eli has some great videos on YouTube, documenting how to do a fixed point, DSP and these, Q number formats.
Mhm.
And, if anybody's interested in that, especially if you're not using an M4, if you're using one of the earlier M0 or whatever to do DSP, then, check out those videos. Very
Okay.
informative.
Yeah, we'll link those in. That's great. That's great. I remember I used to do this is many God, this is probably 2005 now, but we were doing like FPGA stuff and it was before they had a lot of floating point things internally there, and so we were doing DSP stuff inside an FPGA. It had, custom Mac blocks and things like that, so you could make filters, but it was still floating point math, and that was part of the conversion stuff you had to go over. But I assume that things are moving towards that, like everything floating point, like floating point units everywhere kind of thing. And so that that is also helping to speed things up, make things cheaper. What are the main benefits of that kind of thing?
I mean, floating point is just much more natural than fixed point in my brain.
Mhm.
I guess if somebody has a RPN calculator, maybe
Mhm.
fixed point is more their style. But when I rewrote my code for, I mean, in particular, I rewrote this section of code that was dealing with the high pass filter, which was working down at 20 hertz and below. So this was working, real close down to DC, and you really had to have super precision to get the absolute best performance. So I rewrote this in fixed point, and after I did all my tests, I was still a few cycles slower than my original floating point code. And then when I did distortion tests, there was no change either. So, and also I ran into some errors that I never debugged because at that point I decided to scrap it. I ran into some strange bugs. Actually, it's all pretty hazy now. Maybe I did get them figured out, but I think it was
This is this is the
polarity issues.
Python C assembly, MATLAB fugue state.
Oh
That's
my
that's
gosh!
what they call this.
But polarity is a lot easier to never screw up with floats versus, fixed point.
Mhm.
I mean, fixed point's just not natural for me. And
Yeah.
yeah, I had to write all kinds of conversion programs in Python to get my, pre-calculated coefficients.
Yeah. Yeah, and I guess if you're watching the coefficient, or if you're watching all the output then too, you have to, like, either put it through a translator that puts it back to something you understand, right? Or you have to try and, like, look at it natively and, like, understand what the floating point values represent in an
Yeah, yeah.
actual,
When you're debugging your
values.
code, debugging
Yeah.
your code with a floating point is much, much easier than,
Yeah.
yeah, you're getting this fixed point data, and I'm like, "What's going on here?"
Yeah. And so when you look at the numbers and the code and stuff like that, is it like uh, SPLs or like DBs, or what are the actual numbers representing, like a single instant in time of a sample?
Geez.
G's
It's just, I mean,
or volts? I guess. Yeah, that's what I would.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
I mean, you're just looking at, I
G's.
mean,
What does G stand for?
G that was, GEEZ, like
Oh,
like like, what are you asking?
got it.
Yeah, yeah, if I just, see a number in this string, if it's in floating point, yeah, if it's in floating point, it's, going between what, +1 and -1? I don't even, since it's
Okay.
not in
Yeah.
front of
Yeah.
your eye. And then, of course, with, when it's regular, just numbers, 24-bit would be like 8 point, 8.3 million to plus or minus, plus 8.3 million to minus 8.3 million. It's
Uh
whatever,
huh.
uh, 23 bits minus one is.
Got it. Okay. All right. So it's not referenced any like hard. It's not an absolute value because it's unknown coming in. But you're saying you have this maximum range, and then you can like amplify to try and hit like 70% of the maximum input range, so that you get every sound in there.
Like my clipping code,
Yeah, I was gonna ask about that too. Yeah.
my clipping code would be like, "Hey, is this ever more than a 24-bit number, right? Or
Uh
more than
huh.
a 23-bit number?
Uh huh.
Signed 23, whatever, signed 24-bit number." So yeah, it's easy to just say, "Hey, if greater than 8388 whatever, if it's greater than that, then yeah, you've clipped high, or if it's minus that, you've clipped low, and then you go ahead and process it to to roll it off. Well, you
Got
just
it.
you just make it that number
Or you
actually.
or you just do you just ever drop the packet, or no?
No, you just do a hard clip,
Uh-huh.
and so yeah, if you go beyond that number, if you go beyond 24 bits, you are limited at a assigned 24-bit number.
Hmm, okay. And then you also have, so then people that have listened to records before, they would probably hear the pops and the scratches and all that other stuff, and it's you have a thing to try and get rid of that as well, right?
Yep, that was, my big project for well, actually last year and this year. And at the beginning of, back in March when things look like, "Oh, man, this year's gonna be a mess," I decided to go ahead and, nobody was buying and everybody was bummed out, and I was like, "Hey, this would be a great time for me to go ahead and finish this up." I'd intended to launch it in August, just a couple months ago, but I was like, "Hey, if I go ahead and get it kinda working as good as I can, and then launching it as like a beta firmware for people to download, then they can, go ahead and give me feedback and start using it and see if they like it."
Mhm.
And if I totally lay an egg on it, people are preoccupied with other more important things. It's not like I'm gonna get too much egg on my face on this one. But yeah, so, yeah, I made this, I'd spent a year working on something I call Magic, which is a pop and click suppressor attenuator, and, it filters it out, and the whole idea is you don't wanna overly process your music,
Yeah.
and, so it has to be very gentle how it does it, and, people love it. I mean, it's been a huge hit, and it's kind of one of those sticky features
Yeah.
that you want in your
Right, I'll never
product.
go anywhere else because I need this one thing, right? I think actually I saw that in the Amazon reviews as well.
I cannot listen to records without it now.
Oh,
Uh,
interesting.
yeah, it is, it works great.
In that case, right? So a pop, I would imagine, just thinking about. So I look at a lot of waveforms, mostly when I'm editing the amp hour or looking at other audio things in Audacity. When I think about a pop, I would think like a high impulse event. And for a couple samples, when you really zoom in, it's however many samples it is. And then I think about trying to do that same thing, like DSP. Okay, I could probably come up with some logical tests that maybe start to operate on that sort of thing. But thinking about that in analog, that would be really really tough to do because you need to have detection and reaction to it, and you don't want to make it actually impact other things by like you put an RC filter in front of something, yeah, it rolls off everything, but like if you do these high impulse events, you just end up taking out every T sound or every P sound, right? Every high frequency sound. So like, what does that then look like in the DSP realm? Is it like you're just testing and removing?
Well, I do call it magic for a reason.
Oh yeah, here's the secret sauce, folks. Shannon's gonna clam up. He's gonna be like, I can't, yeah, I can't divulge my secrets.
No,
Like
I mean, there
this
is
is this is
a
the this is the well, you're not part of the club.
I mean, as far as, like, detection, I mean, there's a
Uh huh.
PDF out there from the early '90s that people can find, just search, record restoration or something like that, records, impulse, something like that.
Okay.
It's
Yep.
from, like, 91, 92. A guy
Got
was
it.
gonna use a PC to look at these pops and clicks, and he covers how to find those events. It's a pretty good document. The actual correction, that method doesn't really work very well. But yeah, just looking for sharp edges, it's pretty easy to use what he's got in that paper to find things. But then acting, responding quickly and doing it all in just a few milliseconds with 64K. Now that's just as difficult as doing it tastefully.
Yeah.
But
Okay.
finding the impulse events, that's not too difficult. I mean, but yeah, as you say, there's a lot of impulse events like hi-hats, pops, yeah,
Well, and you don't know the next thing that's coming, right? You see, like, okay, you see this huge spike. I can imagine, like, you have like an acceleration factor, right? You say like, oh, well, it went up, it jumped a whole lot more than I expected. I expect, some certain range, it's going to jump way more than that. Okay, but you don't know the next packet. I guess you could look at. Are you looking at multiple packets or multiple data points in order to characterize this sort of thing?
yeah, I mean, I spent a year monkeying around. Once again, back to
Hmm.
Python. If I
Hmm.
did not have Python, to do this, if I was just, writing code and then taking it to my shop and testing it with records, I it would have never happened. So, I mean, I had to sample, tons of wave data that then I processed, for months and months and months with Python, and then go back and see how aggressive it was. Was it doing damage on things that it shouldn't? And then, yeah, without fast iteration on Python, I wouldn't have been able to do it, and it still
Yeah.
took a year of pulling my hair out and driving
Yeah.
my wife crazy, and uh, when you just talk about something all the time.
Yeah. And that's a good lead in too, because we talked about this a little bit before the show. You dropped your previous product to work just on this product. And so you have a philosophy, it seems like, of single product, single focus on this. And it seems like it's paying off in this way. How did that come about?
Well, I mean, part of it goes to the whole, all this theory on modern companies and products and focusing on not just living on what you've been making for years, but looking at what the next wave is gonna be and then jump on that. And that's difficult for big companies, and it was difficult for me too because you have to, go without money for a while you're switching between products. But,
Right.
my previous product was, the Budgie, and it was a tube phono preamp, and it I had sold that for 6 years, and I had had, 6 years of emails, with customers, talking to people who used it, and getting an idea of what they wished the Budgie could do.
Mm.
So, once you have a list of, "Hey, what this product needs to be," and then, being able to adjust the loading, that warmth on anything, and then having a wide range of gain, because the Budgie was just fixed gain, because it was just the tubes. The tubes,
Yeah. Right.
they could only do what's like 38 dB a gain. And then, of course, they couldn't do low noise amplification either. They're tubes.
Right. Yeah. Well, I
Uh,
mean, to a certain crowd, is there anything tubes can't do?
oh, I tell you, I get emails all the time saying, my Budgie's still working pretty good. Maybe I'll get a Puffin one day, but I love the Budgie fans.
What you gotta do, Shannon, is you have to make a special cable to plug the puffin into the budgie, and then it makes it better. And
People
then
do
you do
that.
both. You do
People
both.
people do that,
Bingo.
Chris. But, yeah, to do what I do, being a one-person factory, everything
Mhm.
has to be focused towards the product.
Yeah.
So I have to, like, with the Budgie, I had these, Italian real thingamajigs. They look like, you would put your actual parts in it, and it would cut all the leads off and bend the leads.
Oh, wow.
And then I would, take all these buckets of bent parts and have my wife stuff them into these boards, and then I would take these boards and then use a big solder, bath and lay these boards on top of the solder bath to solder them all. And
Mm,
everything that I did was a process, and I just I can't do 2 products at the same time.
that's right. You know, I have to call you out on this, that you did say it's a one-person factory, but then you said your wife's,
Well,
stuffing
it
the
is
boards for
now.
you, so, yeah.
She was happy about the Puffin's design, probably as much as
Yeah,
anybody.
right, right. So all surface mount, is it
Right.
outsourced assembly, or are you doing the actual assembly now
Uh,
too?
the surface mount stuff is done by Macrofab.
Oh, nice.
So
Okay,
their
cool.
Macrofab is, I tip my hat to them. They, are a fantastic company. I recommend them to anyone.
Mhm. Yeah, and great podcast too. We
Oh,
love those guys, so yeah.
yep, you got it. Parker Dillman, I love seeing what he's doing with his, Jeep or whatever on,
Alright, I will say I've heard enough about that goddamn Jeep.
Well, can we
Parker, if
talk
you're
about a
listening, buy another one. Buy something, he keeps buying them too, so that's the other problem. So, yeah,
can we talk
anyways.
about electric vehicles instead?
Yeah, that's true. I guess the people in their cars, Dave is a little crazy about that stuff now too, so. Yeah, yeah.
But
Alright,
yeah,
yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
everything's focused on a product, and, it really does save. You have to operate it at peak efficiency to be able to do this, to make a product, and I think a lot of people do have too many products, and that's even a kind of a Steve Jobs, type of thing, is if you have too many products, you can't focus,
Mhm.
and, I think I can only do one.
Yeah, that's a really important thing to understand about yourself, I think, like, that it's, I think one of the things is making sure you actually can make a living from it, right? So, like,
Sure.
it seems like you were confident you like you said, you had the 6 years of emails. That is some great product research right there, and you understood the process, and it seems like this is a huge upgrade in terms of manufacturing and, just iteration and all this other stuff. So, yeah, that's a great transformation, I think.
Well, I mean, and at the very beginning of it, I realized, "Hey, I can monkey around with DSP the rest of my life." I mean, I don't
Mhm. Yeah.
I wanna move away from hardware. I
Yeah.
mean, I don't want I mean, I still wanna produce hardware,
Right.
but then I want to, hopefully, I won't have to change the puffin hardware-wise for a decade.
Until
I'd
you
be
put the
hap
M7 in, right?
well, yeah, and I do have a socket in there so that people with the current puffin, hopefully, I'll have a little module with the M7 so they can just plug
Yeah.
in a new one.
Nice. Yep.
But,
Yep.
yeah, to be able to yeah, you got me on that one. Hardware-wise, I am gonna be monkeying around with an M7 in the near future.
Well,
But
I mean, you spoke about it like it was the holy grail a couple, 20 minutes
well,
ago. So, like, I'm not it's
it
not a
is,
surprise, I
it
don't think.
is, it is. I mean, I think if any, the Cortex M7 for small business, for makers, for anybody,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Cortex M7 is just,
Yeah, I mean, if
unbelievable.
you I think it really comes down to, like, power, really, and then you have tons of power, so great, like, that's tons of resources.
But I mean, I'd be happy just to other than when I'm making puffins and shipping off boxes of puffins to Amazon, I'd be happy to just sit on my couch and monkey around with Python
Yeah.
and do new, DSP ideas. Improve Magic. Magic is just, it's still kinda rudimentary in my opinion. I mean,
Mm,
the feedback I've got is amazing and awesome, and it made me feel that's been a real bright spot in this year of 2020 for me.
mhm.
But, I could monkey around with Magic for years, just doing
Yeah.
small improvements.
Yeah, I feel like almost the Amazon reviewer who says, "Oh, I don't wanna put DSP at the front of my signal chain." And, like, I think the argument against that every time is, "Yeah, but you get upgrades." Like, good luck upgrading your tube amp without a soldering iron, like, it's just, like, not gonna happen, and so
Well,
yeah.
actually, that's tube amp guys can swap out their tubes. That's kind of the big fun thing with
Sure, and they do love it, but that's not really upgrading, that's more
well,
side grading,
uh,
like
I think all the people that are kind of hesitant, it's before they've actually used, what I make, but before
Mhm,
they use
yep,
the puff and before they hear, it in their own system, and
yep,
then once
yep,
once they, get to use it, they're a believer. But, yeah, I mean, could I make a crappy product that does sound bad? Sure, it's easy to do that too.
mhm.
So, getting this and that's another reason why Amazon is so successful because
What's that?
people can easily get a product and they can easily return a product. So
Oh, yeah,
that's
yeah.
another part of their success is the ease of return.
Yeah. Yeah, and so tell us a little bit about that because we talked about that before the show as well of like, kinda getting into the FBA, the Fulfilled by Amazon thing. You don't have to deal with logistics
Yeah,
as a one-man shop, but, like, that has other downsides like returns.
yeah, Amazon, I mean, I tell my wife that, Amazon's kinda like a bad marriage. I mean, one you can't get out of. I think of, Steve Ballmer back, in, like, not Revenge of the Nerds, but Nerds 2.0, a
Mm,
documentary back in the '90s. Steve Ballmer talked about when, Microsoft first started working with IBM, and they knew they had to work with IBM because they were the only show in town.
mm. Yep.
And Microsoft referred to IBM as riding the bear. And the whole idea is get on the back of the bear and hold on for dear life.
That's right, and hope it
Because if
doesn't
you
turn around and eat you.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, and if you fall off, you're toast. And Amazon is kinda like that. Amazon, you gotta ride the bear. And
Mm,
definitely, you know, trying to converse with them. they don't have phone support anymore for Amazon FBA.
Oh,
So
really?
you know you could have $100,000 worth of product missing someplace and wouldn't
Oh my
have a
god.
phone number to talk to somebody.
Wow.
Yeah, but you gotta. That's what people use to buy things, and
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Right. It
eh,
is the marketplace. It is the place to go. And if it changes in the future, you'll change too, right? I mean, like that's you go where people are, unfortunately.
yeah, and I mean, and the Amazon review system. That's what people use, and it's what I use, right? I mean,
Sure,
it's
sure.
if something isn't prime, I mean, if there's 2 products on Amazon, one of them's seller fulfilled and one of them's Prime, I'm gonna go for Prime,
Yeah.
and I'm
Yeah.
gonna go with the one with the good reviews, and it's just what people are doing, nowadays, and I don't blame them.
So what's interesting about it is I'm on the page here and I'm looking at it says the compare with similar items. And it's got three comparisons with you. Two of them are from Pile, which I assume is made in China knockoff type thing because one costs $14, another costs $18, and then yours is sitting here at $490. And it's like those are not comparisons, but it is what is Amazon showing, right? And
Well,
so,
and I'm
but
go ahead.
no, no, no. I mean that's just I guess that's it. It is a tough comparison, but that's what the marketplace. That's what the algorithm shows, right? It's like, oh, okay,
Yeah, I mean, I'm happy to be, a lot of people do go from a $20 phono preamp, to the Puffin, and, yep, I mean, it's a phono D I named it a phono DSP,
hmm
and when I first named it that, my engineering friend was like, "Oh, man, that's kinda DSPs, he's a hi-fi guy too. But I
yeah,
was like, "But this is what it is, and it also, it differentiates itself.
differentiate. Yeah, totally. Yeah,
It
yeah,
it
yeah.
is it
It's
is a phono
positioning and
DSP.
marketing, right?
It's the only phono DSP on Amazon."
hmm
So, well, I don't know, I can't say that 100%. There's a lot of things on Amazon. But, yeah, it's a good marketplace. Yeah, if I didn't have any reviews, then, yeah, I don't think it would be that successful. So have still selling from your website.
Yeah, did you sell to your previous customers? Like, how did you convince people to get started with it? Because obviously, you need to have it. Reviews are proxies for word of mouth, right? I think actually, like the audio folks seem like they have a lot of forum posts too. But how do you get people to start talking about this sort of thing?
Forums are everything. Well, I mean,
Yeah.
when I changed over, I kind of changed over right at the apex of my budgie preamp.
Mm, got it.
So I was getting in a lot of my interaction with my customers comes well, the main interaction other than emails is my Facebook Parks Audio account.
hmm
And so, announced it there, it gets into the audio forums. You do your kind of limited launch to get it in people's hands, and then it went from there. But being
Mm.
able to sell from your website along with, Amazon, that's key. And just having as much interaction with folks and having people that believe in, I have been doing this since the early 2000s. So
Yeah.
having that bit of these fans and people that have used your products, that once you get that going, it's something to nurture and will take care of you.
Yeah. Yeah. Kevin Kelly's A Thousand True Fans is that document has held up over the years. Talking about like how A Thousand True Fans will support basically small business. And it sounds like you have a lot more than that. So
Yeah,
that's a good sign.
I think thousand true fans. I think that's a good number. I think
hmm
because you want. I mean, I don't get on the audio forums and like look for look for Shannon Parks or look for Parks Audio stuff because that would drive me crazy.
That would yeah. You'd get a lot of unintended glancing blows.
Yeah, and then what do? Do you hop on there and talk back to these people and look like a complete fool?
I think yeah, acting really defensive and swearing is the right way to do it on the internet, Shannon.
Well, that's a lot of people a lot of people do that.
Yes, as people can hear here, you sound very high strung, and
Well, I'm
no,
trying
you
to
sound very chill, and you're doing things right. So
I'm
I
drinking
keep doing what you're doing.
my green tea.
Yeah, right.
But, yeah, yeah, definitely, interacting with folks and not
Yeah.
being a jerk and taking people's emails seriously and appreciating them. I mean, that's
Mhm.
just appreciating your customer and trying to meet their problems. I mean,
Yeah.
that's the key.
Yeah, and I think having a focus on that too, right? I mean, like, even the Budgie, which was the previous product, was in the phono market as well, right? So you knew you are serving a very specific audience, and you're serving a very
Yeah,
specific need, and you're focused
yeah,
on it versus another company that might have 40 audio products that are trying to do all these different things. So there is that too.
right. Yeah, I mean, and I get emails from people that aren't going to buy any of my stuff, but just have a problem. But they heard that I actually respond to emails. I mean,
Yeah.
and I'm happy to do that because I learn about problems people are having.
Yeah.
And, that's really insightful. And then,
Yeah.
hey, and you get good cred out there. I mean, good karma, that's good. That's important.
Yeah. Totally. Where can people find out more about you and see the product? Maybe see the inside of the product if there's any photos of that.
Uh, Inside of the product, probably. I mean, there's actually a lot of photos even on the Amazon reviews where
Got it.
people
Okay.
are, showing them updating the firmware and things like that. But they can go to my website, which is parksaudio.llc.com. They can go to, Parks Audio on Facebook. They can just, Google me. Oh, I guess I have a couple videos on YouTube.
Yeah, you did a Q&A recently ish, or it's on your website at least. That was a nice
Yeah,
answering people's questions.
geez, I think that's 2 years old now. I
Oh,
I
okay.
I just purchased, some new gear to do a second video, which, I haven't done yet. What's interesting in that video I did 2 years ago, I talked about possibly in the future doing, SP diff, digital outputs, and,
Yeah.
doing the magic type things, and I wasn't sure I was gonna be able to do any of that, but it's interesting looking back that I was able to talk about that even then. But yeah, Facebook and YouTube and my website and just Googling me and seeing what people are saying in forums here and there, Steve Hoffman TV dot forums, things like that.
What is that? I saw that one
S
pop
this
up, but I
Yeah,
didn't
the
know what it
Steve
was.
Hoffman forums, that's some real hardcore vinyl guys,
Mhm.
and I got some fans there, and I really appreciate them.
Hmm. Okay, that's great. Well, Shannon, thanks so much for being on the show and telling us about this stuff. I mean, I think it's I'm sure I didn't ask as many, audio foolery questions as Dave would have wanted me to ask, but I think it's an interesting thing because it's this, very human, music is such a like visceral human experience that like people have very, very strong feelings about, and you're obviously dedicated to improving it and, listening to your customers and working on interesting stuff. And at the end of the day, then you do interesting DSP things with it too, which is, hits the nerd crowd here. So that's great.
Hey, being able to work in music, I just love it. I think it's always a net good in people's
Yeah.
lives, and
Yeah.
to be able to do something like that, it's just fantastic. I feel
Yeah.
really lucky.
That's great. All right. Well, thanks a lot. We'll talk to you soon.
Thanks so much, Chris.
Thanks to Suzanne for editing. Our theme music is Chlora from the Amps by Paul Stevenson. Join our other Amp Hour patron sponsors on patreon.com/theamphour and chat directly with Dave, Chris, and the rest of the patrons on Discord. Special thanks today to our corporate sponsor, Binho. That's BINHO, and Binho is their name-o.